Howdy, folks. Thanks for checking into Mr. Ulrich's landofbiology.com. I, of course, am Mr. Ulrich. Now, last class, we got a chance to talk about the differences between internal and external fertilization, as well as internal and external development. As far as like the strategies, like how many babies do they tend to have, how many gametes do they tend to make, given whether it's internal and external and all that kind of good stuff. In part two here, we're going to take a look at some of the structures, the body parts or egg parts, as the case may be, that are necessary to support the development of the baby. So if we're going to do this, we should probably take a look at the terrestrial egg on the inside and start to get a feel for some of the parts that we have. Look at that smiling embryo right there. That's the baby. All right. We tend to not use the term fetus when we're talking about external developers, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on when we get to the internal developers. But just like you may have heard in the internal developers, I think we talked about this a little bit with the picture of the horse on the first page. The amniotic sac is also in terrestrial eggs and external developers. Now, we're going to see a lot of shared structures here between internal and external developers, and they kind of serve to some degree some of the same functions. All right, the amnion in the terrestrial egg it's got the amniotic fluid in there, so that's going to keep the baby from drying out, and it's also a pretty good shock absorber, depending on what species we got there. Now, mom also, again, has to pack a bagged lunch for her embryo. So within the yolk sac is where we're going to find the yolk itself. The yolk has got lots and lots and lots of fats and sugars and minerals and all the stuff that developing, well, not all of it, but a lot of the stuff that the developing embryo needs. To turn into a bigger embryo. It's kind of a complete system. So as that embryo gets larger and larger, the yolk sac is going to be, it's going to become smaller and smaller. Another extra-embryonic tissue that is needed, that's what these are called. These are tissues that extend away from the embryo itself. Another extra-embryonic sac is called the allantois or allantois. I don't care how you pronounce it. All right, you can see all over the allantois there are all of these lines. These are blood vessels. And this diagram is a little bit misleading. There are also blood vessels extending out into the yolk sac as well. And what these provide, well, first off, the blood vessels close to the surface here along the membrane are going to provide a place for gas exchange to take place. So carbon dioxide off gases from the baby's blood and oxygen diffuses into the baby's blood, and that's going to happen really both at the at the allantois and the yolk sac itself. The other function for the allantois, hey, if you're going to consume, if you're going to nutrify, right, if you're going to take in useful materials, you're also going to be excreting. And so the allantois serves as a place for nitrogenous wastes to be deposited and build up as that embryo is metabolizing. Now, the albumin is the egg white itself. Albumin is actually a protein. There's a little bit of water in there as well. But the albumin is going to be serve as the protein source for the developing embryo. It's also going to keep that baby from drying out as well. Now, you may have noticed when you eat a hard-boiled egg, if you've ever eaten a hard-boiled egg, some people could take the hard-boiled egg shell off in one piece, right? Because there's that membrane that's right underneath the shell. That membrane is called the chorion, and it's kind of smushed right up against the inside of the cell, inside of the cell, inside of the shell. But when the egg is laid, the mom's body temperature is like 106 degrees, something like that. It's over 100 degrees, so Fahrenheit. So it's pretty warm, and that egg is going to cool off a little bit, even though she's going to be sitting on it or whatever, gestating on it there. And as the egg cools off, it's actually going to contract. and that little airspace that's formed happens because of the thermal contraction of the material that's in here. Although it does get larger, and it does provide for some gas exchange. So we have to be able to, in order for the gases to leave from the blood vessels around the allantois and around the yolk sac itself, it's got to also make it through the albumin, which isn't too much of a problem, but it's also got to make it through that chorion, that little layer, and it's got to go through the shell, which actually has a couple of layers itself. The shell is porous. It's got lots of little spaces, right, for gas exchange. It can also, it's where evaporation of water is going to take place as well. So it is a little bit limited there. Now, it's important for us to be able to compare this to internal developers. And again, we're going to see a lot of the same structures, a lot of the same extra-embryonic membranes, and to some degree, they're going to serve the same purpose. Now, we're going to need, in internal developers, we're going to need some actual specialized organs for that development. This picture has some, it's a little hard to read those the labels there. I'm going to go through it here. Again, we have the embryo, and I can tell this is a European version diagram here because they're spelling it with the OE. There's a name for that letter that I can't think of off the top of my head, but it's fetus. All right, a fetus is a term for a late term. We usually say the dividing line between embryo and fetus is when the fetus can live on its own to some degree, although that gets a little weird because we can have some miraculously surviving premature babies these days that are really underdeveloped, and they actually develop. So so a fetus is kind of, we could just call it a late term embryo. There is also an amnion surrounding the baby, and there's amniotic fluid in there. This is when the water breaks, the amnion ruptures, and some of the amniotic fluid comes out. Well, everything's coming out eventually. And so it does the same job. It's going to keep that baby from drying out. It's actually going to keep the baby from sticking to the uterine wall itself, and that amniotic fluid acts again as a shock absorber. Now you'll notice there is no yolk sac over here because this baby has implanted. We're going to talk more about the implantation and the process of internal development after we get through this material here. But between where conception takes place, where fertilization takes place, hopefully in the oviduct, and the uterus where the embryo is going to implant, it takes some time, we're talking a week or so, or less, to get to the uterus, and that embryo has got to have the resources that it needs. So we talk about external developers packing a bag lunch. We still pack a bagged lunch. It's just for a few days, just a little overnighter type of thing. Now, I've used the word uterus. Again, I'm hoping it's not the first time you've heard of a uterus, but this is the site of implantation, right? That's where where that egg is going to essentially attach to mom. It's going to form a placenta, which we're going to get to here in a second. And the site of gestation. That term means when the baby develops. This is not the site of fertilization, hopefully. It is not the site of insemination. That's going to be the vagina, all right? And so this is the site of implantation. Like I said, the placenta, and I'm going to show you some pictures of the placenta in a couple moments here in the next slide. We'll look at it a little bit closer. But that's an amazing organ. It's a temporary organ. We don't have many of those. We use it for a while, and then when we're done with it, kind of get rid of it. But the placenta is an amazing organ. It's going to allow mommy and baby blood to get real close to one another, so there can be exchange of materials, waste products, blood gases, stuff like that. Now, the umbilical cord is what attaches the baby to the placenta itself. It's important to recognize that the umbilical cord is not the site of exchange. All right, that's really not where the baby is getting nutrients from mom from. All right, it's really the kind of the highway to go from that exchange spot to the baby. All right, but the placenta is doing the work of the exchange itself. To look a little closer at the placenta, here's it's a little tiny embryo hanging out there, making it look like it's able to swim laps in that amnion there. But this is a pretty early term baby here, and you can see that this site here is going to be where the placenta is. If we look a little bit closer, all right, there are these, this is the umbilical cord side, so this is baby side over here, and this is mommy side over here, maternal blood vessels. And really what happens is they kind of, the chorion puts these like fingery projections into the placenta. There are these they're called cavernae, I believe, these kind of big areas where mom's blood gets pumped into, kind of pools of blood almost, and those chorionic villi, they're called, little fingery projections, extend into those areas. With the little fingery projections, we get lots of surface area, and of course this is where we get exchange of material between baby and mom. Carbon dioxide, oxygen, nutrients, waste products. Unfortunately, can also, it's not fussy. Things that mom takes in, the baby is going to take in as well. And so if it's helpful stuff, fantastic. If it's not so helpful stuff, that's going to happen as well. So we really got to be careful. Alcohol goes across these, other drugs can go across these, nicotine can go across this. So there's something to think about. To look a little closer here, you can really see these chorionic villi, right? Extending into the intervillous space is what they're calling it here. The name is escaping me. It's not so important for us. To get a picture of what it actually looks like, note that is not my wife's placenta. She made sure that I would not show my students pictures of Bruce's birth, but you know, it is what it is. That gives you an idea of the size of the placenta itself. When after parturition, so that's when the baby is born, after the baby is born, all of the extra-embryonic membranes and the placenta need to exit the mom as well. It's most often referred to as afterbirth. And if we do a cesarean section, like my wife and I did, well, I didn't have one, but like my wife had when we had Bruce, they'll actually go in and remove the placenta, and when they have the uterus open, they're going to rinse it out and make sure that all the parts of the placenta have made it out of the uterus, so we don't leave any bits behind there. That can cause all kinds of problems, infections, and well, it's going to be necrotic flesh and all kinds of neat stuff that can happen. That's no fun at all. We should, of course, if we're going to talk about external versus internal developers, we got to talk about non-placental mammals here. Now, normally I give you a copulation of the day, and I didn't get to do one, so here's kind of one. It's what's most interesting about things like kangaroos is they don't hatch from eggs. Right, kangaroos. Kangaroos are a group of organisms called marsupials, where they have a little pouch, and of course, conception takes place, fertilization takes place internally. Mom gives birth to a really, really underdeveloped embryo. It looks like almost like a little grub. And it's got to crawl its way from mom's vagina all the way up into the pouch. Mom's going to help it out. She licks a little kind of saliva trail for the kind of larvae almost. It's an embryo to kind of crawl its way into the pouch. In the pouch is a nipple, right? And that baby's going to attach to the nipple, and it's going to eat milk, get its milk meal from there, and continue to get the nourishment that it needs. Of course, it's going to excrete. There's no allantois. There's no placenta to bring the waste products away. And so as it gets rid of its waste, it gets rid of its waste right in the pouch. So it gets kind of nasty in there. Mom keeps it clean. She cleans it out. So that there aren't too many problems there, but obviously it works. So marsupials, underdeveloped embryos, there's no implantation. She doesn't need a uterus, but of course she does need a pouch. Now monotremes, like Perry the platypus over here, monotremes are a little bit different. All right, they are really bizarro. All right, these are our egg-laying mammals. They're kind of a crossover between mammals and, I don't know, egg-laying like reptiles, I guess. When the eggs hatch, mom lays an egg. She produces milk, right? She doesn't have nipples though. The milk comes out of kind of like specialized their mammary cells, excuse me, mammary glands, but it comes out kind of like sweat, and the little babies have to like lick the milk out of her fur. But it still works. The babies are actually, when they hatch, they're cold. They're poikilotherms. They're cold-blooded. They're ambient temperature. It's pretty warm where they down in Australia where they hang out. So they're pretty warm, but they are not able to maintain a stable internal body temperature for I guess a few weeks, and that kind of kicks in. All right, well, that's enough. I'm going to leave it there for now. Sorry I couldn't be in class today. If you have any questions, you can either email me, put them in on Google Classroom, or hold until next class when I'll be back. Other than that, I hope you have a fabulous afternoon, and we'll see you next week.